Hello and welcome to PRISA interview series. Today we are honored to have Mr. Ali Salman with us. He holds a PhD in public policy. He is the founder and executive director of Policy Research Institute of Market Economy. He is also the CEO of Islam and Liberty Network. He all is also member advisory council PRISA. So thank you, Dr. Salman, for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Nadi. Thank you.
So let's start today that you have been very vocal for the market economy. So how do you see the and its impacts of markets in various sectors of South Asian economies?
Right. First of all, Dr. Nadeem, I congratulate you and your colleagues and your team for launching an important initiative in the name of PRISA, which is, I think, one of the important challenges which you have highlighted, and the fact that your think tank is trying to bring various countries of South Asia together. That is extremely important. So I'm glad to be on also on your advisory council, and thank you for bringing this discussion. Idea of integration is very central in today's world, whether you talk about trade or other facets of integration. I think that's why I think your initiative is very timely and very important. Now, if I come back to the idea of the market economy, and if you look at various countries of this region, leading countries, of course, are Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Um, they are on various degrees of economic freedom, and there are various levels of evolution which these countries have faced over last 40, 50 years. Um, when you specifically mention about the role of the state and the role of the market in their economic development series, or in the history of economic development, then we can identify two very clear trends, I would say. um, Historically, India before 1990s was a centrally planned economy, a socialist economy for all practical purposes. License was everywhere. And Pakistan, comparatively, has been an open economy for most part of its history, except those 5 or 7 years from 1970s, when Bhutto
Bhutto Sahab
was there.
era.
So, um, in other parts of South Asia, I think we have seen very strong socialist and Maoist governments in Nepal, and also socialist tendencies in Sri Lanka. Similarly, in Bhutan, we have seen similar tendencies. I think it's an interesting region in that perspective, where you see all these variations. Um, in in terms of market economy, history of market economy in the region, if I just take the example of Pakistan and India being the sort of dominating countries here, it is clear that in 1990s, India consciously took a different route. They opened up the economy. They started reforming, opened up the markets, open for investments, deregulation, privatization, liberalization. And Pakistan was already on that sort of route, but Pakistan was like start and stop, where India continued their journey, and still it has not looked back on that reform process, and it is really paying off when we see the level of economic development, um, at least to some in terms of some indicators. Look at the level of FDI they're receiving. Per capita income is improving, and generally business environment has improved. So yes, I think we see these variations in the region, and it will be interesting to actually draw some comparison because they come from the same region.
As you mentioned, India opened up their economy in 1990, and they are now enjoying the fruit of that economic freedom. So, based on that, what are the challenges of economic freedom in other South Asian countries? Why they did not learn from this experience, or if they learned, what were the challenges on this way?
You can say that, as an example, I mean, for example, if you take take Sri Lanka case. So for a long time, Sri Lanka has faced civil war. Until 2008 and 9, there was a huge violence in Sri Lanka, which actually, you know, did not allow the peaceful conditions to prevail. So I think that is one condition always for economic development, that you have to have peaceful condition. In case of Pakistan, as I said, although we have been historically on the pro market side or economic freedom side, but then we have also seen the emergence and continued presence of the state, and that is to do with various factors. We have political leadership, which are, like, not all the political leadership is convinced that this is where we need to go. So there are variations. We also have seen the bureaucratic resistance to reforms in Pakistan. And then if you look at the private sector and the corporate sector, they have been sort of together with their interests have been aligned with the state, so to speak. We saw, by the way, we see similar issues in India also. They also have their corporate lobbies, and look at their media, for instance, which is very closely aligned with the political leadership. And there have been, like, instances where, the political lobbying have influenced the economic policy of the country. So there are similarities, but I think, if you look at the history clearly, we see that in India, we see more economic freedom, relatively speaking, and a continuation of policies which is paying them.
The role of trade. So, as you also know it, that this region is perhaps one of the least integrated region in the world. And you also know better than me, at least, that economic freedom and the prosperity, for all that, one, you need the free will of the people to make choices, and then the free will to trade across countries and trade across borders. So in this aspect, what do you see, what are the prospects of economic integration in South Asia, especially among the countries like Pakistan and India, which have historically been on some issues?
Right, huge issues. I mean, both countries, of course, have fought wars, and there is a resentment on both sides. And I've been to India only once, and in my observation, I think and this is, I'm saying as a Pakistani, but also as a neutral observer, that we don't have, like, at a public level, at a street level, or even at a business level, we don't have an much of a negative attitude towards India. But I've seen, I think if you look at Indian media, I see them very hostile towards Pakistan, right? And so that's the issue, which has been perhaps shaped by the media narratives also. And we have seen, at least in some year, until some years ago, I mean, until 2018, I would say, or 2017, we had open Wagah border. There was connectivity, people were crossing the roads, borders, market exchange was happening, the trade was much more open. And now it is virtually, like, formal trade is almost nil between two countries. But just few years ago, we were, you know, I think about $2 billion was worth of trade happening. That has been almost brought to zero. Um, and for if you go back, for a long time, India declared Pakistan most favorite nation from late 90s, post WTO, about 20 years, and it was demanded from India that Pakistan also reciprocate, but Pakistan did not declare that. So I think we missed that window. But then the political leadership, and in Pakistan, of course, the military establishment also has a lot of say in foreign policy matters. So that ultimately influenced the change of policy here also. And with and especially when we have PMLN and Nawaz Sharif as prime minister, I think the relationships with India were more friendly. He has been an outspoken supporter of open trade between the two countries. Um, and on one side we had the rise of Prime Minister Modi, who has been very hostile towards the neighbors, including Pakistan. And on the other side, we also had Imran Khan, who was also not that friendly, I would say, to the that a peaceful neighbor, like really, as between these two countries. So the emergence of relatively two hostile political leadership then curtailed that, or deteriorated that environment of uh, potentially trust between the two people, and they're ultimately affected, because if you're not, if there's no level of trust between the people, business to business, then of course it is also reflected in the political environment. So one of the interesting thing which I would like to also mention here is the whole concept of South Asia, at least how it is viewed by multilaterals, is also changing, and that could be a challenge. For instance, you may be aware already that at least in the IMF records, Pakistan is not a part of South Asia.
Oh, really?
Okay? Can you believe that?
No, I didn't know it. I can't believe it.
So not only IMF, but the World Bank, IFC, they consider Pakistan not part of South Asia anymore. So Pakistan falls in their Middle East and North Africa program.
Oh, that's
So on one hand, we are talking about the integration of South Asia, right? Bringing the two countries and communities together. On the other hand, what we see that multilaterals are looking at Pakistan and Afghanistan, which are officially part of SARC.
yeah.
But in their records, in their classification, they have actually detached Pakistan and Afghanistan and placed under Middle East and North Africa. So that's a question which we all need to debate ourselves, but also maybe with multilaterals, that why this was changed and what was the driver of this change, and how this change is going to affect the intentions, the good intentions of think tanks like yours, in stopping the integration, actually. Because if this trend continues, you can imagine, and this is official. I mean, I'm not saying that this is being discussed. This has been classified as such. So currently Pakistan is under an IMF program, and so we have a country director or country representative who reports to the regional, and the region is the Middle East and North Africa. So we have also IFC program in Pakistan, a country manager. The country manager reports to a country director who sits in Amman.
oh,
So that's the whole idea of the South Asia integration is being challenged by the multilaterals. So we should fight this. I think we need to
yes.
debate
Thank you
seriously
for
about this.
highlighting this issue. Actually, I personally didn't knew about it, but it's something an interesting development. As you mentioned various points, I can also recall that the issue, how the issue of most favored nation was framed in Pakistan, like translating it into
Yeah.
Urdu, like Pasandida train mulk,
Yes.
then building a narrative on that. And I can recall Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee coming to Pakistan and how he was hosted. And also we see when Sikh come to Pakistan, and especially when they visit Lahore, the people there, they welcome them hugely, but it's the state which
Right.
have the issues. So building on that, as you know, the integration in South Asia is one of the areas where PISA is looking to contribute more. And given your vast experience with the founding the think tanks and running the think tanks, how do you see this scholarly community and the role of the think tanks that could help building good, friendly, or at least some neutral kind of the relation between the countries?
That's very important. I mean, first of all, I like to acknowledge that For some years there are think tanks like SDPI, for instance, has been arranging regular regional dialogue. Their annual Sustainable Development Forum takes place. I think this year it was already 25 or 26 years. Their annual meeting is the important is an important opportunity for scholars, for think tanks, for academics, researchers from the region, South Asia region, to collaborate and to come and to present their views. But unfortunately, for last few years, the very practical issues like visa issuance has been discouraged, both India and Pakistan, because this the you see the dynamic is like the region cannot move forward unless India and Pakistan develop harmonious relationship. That's the dynamic of the region. So if the two countries keep looking at each other as enemies, then there is no chance for peaceful situation. And without peace, then it is difficult to create prospects for investment, for economic development. So I think that's where the problem lies. That we have to, first of all, for when you talk about integration in the region, we have to start from people to people contact. So there was a lot of there's a lot of history about track to diplomacy in these countries, which is almost against and to now it is not happening. But then we have to let this happen. Let this flow of human traffic, the people to people connection is very, very important. But unless we do it, I mean, we also had rich history, like for instance, in movies, in filmmaking, um, vast part of our countries share common language. When I'm outside, and I'm sure you have experienced the same, outside the region, in let's say Europe or US, if I meet someone from India and we are talking with talking in same language, and there's a third one like an American who's observing, talking to a Pakistani and Indian speaking in the same language, the first reaction is always of surprise. Really, you're talking the same language? Yeah, because that's how world sees us, like Pakistan, India, always like fighting each other, and then we have also sort of we also in in Lahore Wagah border, we have this ceremony of exchange of military uh, military parades. It is quite dramatic, but that's like it unfortunately enforces the image of hostility, not of peace, not of friendship. So I think these are some of the very practical the hurdles. Um, and then usually what happens is that none of these country right now is like ready to sort of take the initiative. So that's important, and hopefully with PMLN government back in action, there may be a breakthrough in the future. But I don't know. It's also it depends on the reaction from the Indian side. Um, Also, while we are talking about Pakistan and India, I think we also need to bring other countries in the debate, like Bangladesh, which was, of course, part of Pakistan in 1971. And it's interesting to see how um, there is a recent change in Pakistan and Bangladesh relationships after the fall of the government of Sheikh Hasina Wajid, right? And that's why where I think we have more opening of establishing peaceful relationship in the region. That at least there is a talk of normalization in some parts. So we need to encourage that, and we need to move forward. Otherwise, this region, which also has, I think, I don't know, probably about 40% of the world poor population lives in South Asia. Um, and unless we address these issues, we cannot bring peace here.
Now, coming to the last question, that There have been growing skepticism about the globalization, and many countries are adopting the protectionist industrial policies. So, how do you think the trend in the South Asia on these lines will emerge in future? You being a vocal of market economy, globalization, but the era of some industrial policy that is also coming up these days, especially if you treat the work of Roderick and others.
Yeah.
How do you see the things evolving on these lines in South Asia?
That's interesting, actually, and it is particularly interesting because let's say India has been a major member of the alternative trade bloc BRICS. Right, Pakistan, of course, is not a member, but they so there are like maybe there are two trends there. So one trend is that these countries are trying to set up an alternative financial system in which they are trying to create an alternative currency other than US dollar. And the other trend I would say, which is in which China is leading, is that they are pressing for more free trade, and because of course China is now in fact the lead voice of keeping the trade trade open. US has gone to more on the protectionist side, but I think on I would say that the discussion right now on tariff is limited to certain sectors. And while we definitely see a reemergence of industrial policy, as you have rightly said, pointed out, we will remain like the world overall will remain integrated in terms of the trade, in terms of the supply chains, in terms of the development. So we are not going to go back totally. There, uh, maybe there is like let's say between like unilateral trade liberalization, which led the trade flow or trade openness trends for a long time, and the protectionism. There might be a third way, and third way is the regional trade, regional connectivity, and the concentration of the trade happening within the regions. I think that's where we need to look more carefully. So if you think about if you consider, for instance, Southeast Asia, ASEAN region, almost 60% of the trade happens in within the region, and then 40% outside the region.
Interesting.
Right? So and you will whenever you see the trade flows, you will see the dominance of intra-region trade of their member countries. In Pakistan or in this region, this is less than 5%.
Yes, exactly.
And so it means that we have a huge potential to uncover in terms of regional trade. Now, some people can say that okay, there may be a lot of similarities because trade happens when there are complementarities. So we have raw material, and then there's a market for finished goods, and so that's why you exchange. But then this idea of value chain is also is there, in which you are not exchanging and you're not engaging just on the basis of supplier and buyer. You may be engaging as a component of a product. So it is possible that within the region we have we can actually come up with product which are on which different regions can play a role along the supply chain. So Pakistan may have specialty in some thing, India might have specialty in another part of the same product, Sri Lanka might have specialty in another part. So I think that is where we need to discuss more, that how actually the supply chain integration can bring the countries together, because otherwise they might be perceived as competitors. If each country is just eyeing at global market, at let's say North American market or EU market, then it could be just this being of a competitor. But on the other hand, if you look at from cooperative angle, then perhaps this strategy may be adopted and may be useful.
So, what I can learn from your answer is that if the policymakers, the people, and the decision makers all want to cooperate, there are opportunities for cooperation and for the mutual benefit. But for that, it is important that they should realize the value of it, and they should work continuously on that without any, you can say, detractions or breaks or all that.
I agree, and I think although you mentioned also in the beginning, or somewhere in our conversation, that there is an important role which the think tanks should be playing, and regardless of whether the government is immediately taking any action in any of these countries, our think tank community should keep on bringing these debates and highlighting how these countries and, let's say, the private sector or intellectuals can collaborate. So bringing those examples of collaboration is very, very important. And maybe PRISA has an advantage there because PRISA is not based in the region. Because if you're based in the region, let's say either you're based in India or Bangladesh or Pakistan, then there will be a lot of pressure on you from local administration, establishment, local governments, or national governments, that you should not do this. When some years ago I traveled to India, I was I there was a lot of pressure on me actually not to travel to India. Actually, it's like a physical pressure that okay, you should not travel to India, and then I had to still negotiate and then come back, and then it was okay. But then many people just don't go or travel, and it is both ways, by the way, both sides. So I have friends in think tank community in India. A leading think tank here is called Center for Civil Society in base in New Delhi, and they're doing some great things. For instance, with the current government, with Prime Minister Modi, the think tank CCS, Center for Civil Society, has come up with the idea of abolishing 100 colonial laws. Wow. And many of their recommendations were ultimately accepted, approved, and implemented. So this happened within India, which of course, like Pakistan, inherited similar bureaucracy, similar conditions. Although I would still think that institutions in India were more developed than, let's say, India in this part of the world. But okay, we had a similar quality of administration, and therefore similar level of problems when it comes to doing business. But that's where I think the role of think tank can again be very helpful. Sharing of examples, sharing of the stories, that how let's say good research backed up by the resources, good lobbying, advocacy can actually lead to reforms, and stories which think tanks within the region can perhaps share. That could be a way forward.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. It was really very nice talking to you. I wish I could continue it more, but in the interest of the time, we have to end it. So, thank you so much for this PISA Prime interview. And we look forward to more interviews in future and more interaction with Dr. Ali as well.
Thank you, Dr. Nadeem. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully this will be of interest to the audience.